I'm just out here in the back plot, just making a couple tweaks to my irrigation. The weather's changed a lot actually lately, so we are in what we call the month of Juneuary out here in the Okanagan, and it's very typical. People always forget though, it's funny, like I hear local news headlines and stuff talking about like what happens to the weather and stuff. It's like, dude, this is the same thing every year. In June, it gets cooler again. It's been this way as long as I can remember. I was born and raised here. It's always been this way. So I'm kind of tweaking some things on the irrigation. We kind of set the timers back. Also had to make some adjustments on the sprinklers themselves. And this tool, I don't know if you guys ever used this thing called roller gear. It's super cool. I love these. It's a great screwdriver because it's like it ratchets, but it's quiet. It actually doesn't click like some of the other ones out there. And I really like this. I use this for adjusting anything on the irrigation. I'll have the link below if you guys are curious about that thing. But so just changing some stuff on the irrigation. And it's funny because, yeah, people always think, oh my God, what happened to summer? But this happens every year. So anyways, we're in that seasonal phase right now. So we're doing some tweaking to the irrigation on the plots to roll things back a little bit. And there's two things that I want to talk to you about today and give you guys some value. The first is how we've changed our succession cropping strategy now that our farm is a lot smaller. And the second thing is explaining what's going on with the shade cloth. So let's go look at the shade cloth first. So we have temporarily rolled the shade cloth back on the nursery, and the main reason for that is because of the weather. It's just been rainy and mostly cloudy. It doesn't get that rainy here in Kelowna, but it's cloudy nonetheless. And the clouds kind of get socked in our valley, and so the clouds are quite thick, and it actually causes a lot of light diffusion, and you especially notice it in places where you're using shade cloth. And we had that shade cloth on this greenhouse for, I'd say, at least a month now. And we've been noticing in the last few days that things were getting lanky, especially the nursery stuff. Like I just started a bunch of more paper pot flats here, and our last batch of lettuce, here's what was left over from it, was just really stretching and reaching for the light. So that's a result of the shade cloth in combination with the fact that it's been really overcast. So one thing I've learned, and this is the thing that I want to share with you, is that shade cloth is great, but if you're going to run into some periods of time, you maybe look at the forecast and you see, 5, 6, 7 days of rain or just cloudy weather, peel the shade cloth back. At least in my climate, that has been really critical. Now what we've done with the other plots for the time being is we've just taken the shade cloth off as well, because it just wasn't really, it wasn't doing anything for us in this kind of weather. So we're peeling it back. In fact, what we're gonna do with our caterpillar tunnels, and we haven't done it yet because we haven't needed to, but once it gets warm again, we kind of have figured that the shade cloth, at least the 50% shade cloth with poly, isn't working very well. So we're actually just gonna peel that shade cloth off and then take the poly off our caterpillar tunnels in the summer and just have them open in the field. The main thing that's happening on the farm this year that's very different from even previous years, I've been farming small for a while now. I mean, my farm has always been urban, so it's always been less than an acre, except for 1 year where I had 2.5 acres. But for the most part, I've always been fairly small. But what's different now than in previous years and how we're going forward is that we have the least amount of beds that I've ever had on the farm. We have 46 50-foot beds. Now, that little group of beds over there are 25 feet long, and so I'm counting them 2 in one 50-foot bed. So just to make things simple, all the greenhouses, all the beds that are 50 feet, whether some of the greenhouses are 36 feet or not, we've basically grouped it all into a total linear foot and then divided it by 50, and then we've arrived at that number. And in fact, I think it's like 45.7 or something like that. Basically, if 46 50-foot beds. So what's the challenge right now is that I've always planted, once we're in the main season, and so if you guys have my book and you've read my book, I talk about kind of how we start going on to more consistent succession plantings in May. And so what normally happens in, around the first, second week of May is that every single week we're planting the same group of crops, and then maybe bi-weekly we would do something like carrots. And so I'm not including things like tomatoes or longer season crops or paddy pan squash or any of that stuff we've done in the past. We start to plant, like, say for example, this is what, just last year, this is kind of what I was doing every single week from May until the first week of September. 1 bed of turnips, 2 beds of radishes, 2, sometimes 4 beds of arugula, 2 beds of lettuce, 1 or 2 beds of red Russian kale. Every second week we do a bed of carrots. More or less, that's what our succession cropping plan looked like every single week, week in, week out. So the challenge for us is that we have mostly 50-foot long beds, and we only have 46 of them. So if I were to take that same grouping of crops and try to succession plant it in the same way that based on the land we have now, it would be impossible. I would run into a brick wall, basically. I would run out of places to plant. And you can't have that on a farm that needs consistent weekly production. So there's really 2 ways you could go about doing this. And I want to pitch the other one so that some of you might be able to use that idea. And I'll say that one first. So the one thing you could do in a situation like mine is you could actually go to a shorter bed unit. You could go to 25-foot beds. So maybe you wouldn't have to eradicate your 50-foot beds and split them up physically. You could just maybe plant half of a bed. So you could keep going with that same succession, but just have smaller units. Now that would work, and I've done that in the past. In fact, when I first started, that's more or less what I did. I had smaller beds. But we don't do as many crops as we used to, and we still move large volumes of those crops. Like right now, we're harvesting 140 to 150 pounds of lettuce a week, and we're selling that. That's just lettuce. So we're still doing, about 100 pounds of spinach a week. Right now we're doing about 50 pounds of arugula a week, 30 to 40 pounds of red Russian kale a week. So all in all, we're still doing a lot of greens. And so I don't want to go to a smaller bed unit because I'm still moving a lot of one type of product. So if I were just to go to shorter beds, then I would just have more beds to harvest. And if I were to split those beds up, basically there'd be no point, right? Whereas if you had a larger crop diversity than we do, then it would make more sense. So let me explain how we're doing it now based on the one I just explained. So we're not doing shorter beds, we're gonna keep our beds the same way. We are planting by crop development and basically by eye. So instead of saying I need this and this and this and this every single week, Mark and I are going out in the field every Friday, and we're taking some photos and making an analysis plan of what's in the field, what's coming on, what's going to be ready in the next 2nd, 3rd, and 4th week, and then just making a judgment call from there. So we'll go, and let's say I planted a bed of red Russian last week, and I've also still got some in the field that's maybe on its 2nd and 3rd cuts. I might say, okay, you know what, we probably don't need to plant that this week because this one that was planted last week is going to be getting close, and then we've still got 2nd and 3rd cuts from the other ones. And we'll basically apply that across the board to everything. That's the one thing that's really cool about cut and come again greens, is that you do have these overlaps. And actually in my book, I actually explain this because I have done this for a long time, but I haven't done it where that's what's happening exclusively on the farm, and that's the situation we're in right now. So if you want to understand that concept more, check out my book. I always have a link for it. You can get it on my website. There's always a discount code to my book in the show notes below. I kind of explain that, and I have like little timelines where I show how certain crops overlap, and it gives you a better visual representation of how succession planting works on a farm that's consistently harvesting week in and week out. So we're in our primary polytunnel here in the back of my farm, and half of it is covered with this shade cloth, and that's actually seemed to have benefited this basil to some degree. This basil wall is actually doing pretty good. What we've done with this recently is well, it's doing well considering what we screwed up at the beginning. When we first set this thing up, let me come a bit closer, we were irrigating it from the top, and all the water was dripping. We actually had this gutter going the other way. It was going down this way, and the water was just running off. And talking to the folks at Grow Up who make this product, they were like, dude, you got to recycle the water back. And so what we've done now, and I think it's working better, and it's actually using less water, is we've changed the direction of our gutter. So once this irrigates through here, drips through, the water drips into these little DIY gutters we have. We've built a little collection basin here, and that water just cycles through, and it's really brown looking, kind of, it looks like urine. It's not, but it looks like urine. That water will cycle back because it's full of whatever was in that soil. And so now it cycles back, so it's actually using a lot less water, and we're kind of keeping the nutrients of that soil more intact. So I think it's going to be better off. I really would like to kind of start this again, doing it this way, to see how it'll go, and we'll probably have an opportunity to do that. Well, I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to do that this season. We're actually going to start doing basil in the ground. So this greenhouse there's not a lot happening in it right now. I got a row of tomatoes. These are just for us, really. And we've got some other crops. No, all these other beds are empty. This greenhouse is actually going to be our carrots for the first little while, and then it'll cycle into greens once we get into late summer, early fall. But I've started 2 beds of carrots here, and carrots are a root crop that we're still doing. We still actually sell a lot of, but we only do them in the main season. So this greenhouse will be a succession of carrots for the next little while, and then it'll go to greens later than that. We are going to have a bed of basil on the edge of the greenhouse here. I'm going to do a paper pot transplanted bed of basil over there, and we actually took half the shade cloth off this greenhouse because I wanted to actually shade the basil. That's actually been working really well, and I wanted to keep a bit of shade on these carrots before they germinate, so that they germinate well. Because if we don't have the shade cloth on here, this greenhouse gets too hot, even with the ventilation. We've opened it all up on the ends, even on this end here, it's all open, so it's better. But the tomatoes, they weren't doing that great with the shade cloth in the beginning either, so I think they're going to be better now, because at least for, I'd say, 3/4 or 2/3 of the day, they're getting real sunlight, not 50% shade cloth sunlight. So they already look like they're doing better. All right, guys, that's what's happening on the farm. Today, I am on my way to Quebec. I'm going to be hanging out with my good buddy, Jean-Martin Fortier. I'm going to be teaching a 5-day workshop at his new farm, Les Farms des Quatre Temps. So if any of you guys have questions you want me to ask JM, I'll be making some videos there. You know, it's busy when you're teaching these workshops, so I don't know when these videos will come out, but if you have questions that you want me to ask him, ask those questions in the discussion forum I posted. So on my channel, a little community tab where I asked you guys, hey, what do you want me to ask JM? I also asked about Richard Perkins, because I'm going to be going to see him in Sweden next month. But I want to have all these questions in one place so that I can just go there and then pick the best ones and then ask JM. So if you have questions, I'll actually leave a link, a sub-link in the show notes in here as well beneath. So click on that and then go and give me your best questions for Jean-Martin Fortier. If you guys liked this video, smash the like button, subscribe if you haven't, hit the notifications bell next to the subscribe button if you want to get notifications about my videos. All right, guys, we'll talk to you later.